Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Doc of Detox show. I'm Dr. Darrell Wolfe, and today's show is part two, Predicting the Future Through Nature's Cycles, with Peter Temple. Peter Temple, the truth sage, is one of the world's leading experts on the natural cycles that influence stock markets, climate, social mood, and the economy, while forecasting periods of expansion and depression. For a period, he was the executive director of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, founded in 1941. On a daily basis, he's a stock market analyst, forecasting the movement of U.S. equities, oil, gold, and U.S. dollar-related currencies. So let's begin the show. Good day, Peter.
Good day. All set to go.
Part two, here we go. For those of you who did part one, that was 2 hours, and what did you think of that? Well, just wait until you see what's going to happen on part two. All right, Peter, take it away.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. So here is, and I use this line quite often in talking about cycles, is that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So if you did not see session one, the first part, this is really all about natural cycles. And natural cycles, I didn't say this in the first part, but a cycle is actually like a sine wave. And the key thing about a cycle, in order to be called a cycle, it needs to be predictable. In other words, it needs to have periodicity. And periodicity means that it needs to have a start date and an end date, and it needs to repeat in that time frame again and again and again. And so that is a cycle. So if it isn't a cycle that happens in a finite period of time, then you can't really call it a cycle. It is just, it's just a phenomenon, and it might be a one-time only. So we went through a little bit of the basics of cycles, and what I did in part one was introduce you to this guy, Dr. Raymond H. Wheeler. And Dr. Raymond H. Wheeler, for a lot of his life, had 200 people working for him. He was a PhD at the University of Kansas. And he had 200 people working for him, and they put together something called the Big Book, which he's shown with right here. And in that, he recorded all of the temperatures going back to, from about 1942 was his last entry, back to 600 BC. So that is a tremendous amount of time. And he also recorded the rainfall with all of these people working for him. And they also went back and recorded all of the major events in all kinds of areas within society. And so from that, you can see recurring traits over and over and over again. And what he was interested in was climate. So what he did was related these events to climate. But I truly believe it's more than just climate, because I don't think climate affects people to the degree he thought. I believe it is electromagnetic waves. But whatever it is, this comes from our solar system. And so, folks, we're not in control. We're on this, I call it third rock from the sun, whipping through the universe, and we have got the rest of our solar system and the sun controlling what goes on Earth, and we just have to stay in sync with the cycles and understand what's going on. So I'm here today to explain the cycles. So what we did in the first part was I took you kind of up to the English Empire and Elizabeth I. What I'm going to do in this part is to take you beyond that. So what we did was I gave you an overview of all of this area of cycles. This goes back to 2000 BC, way back in here. And you can see the ups and downs of the temperature. This blue line is temperature. And every 1,030 years, roughly, there is a high. And then between that, we get something historically called the Dark Ages, and it gets very cold and dry. And this is the period that we're going into. We're at the top of the American Empire, and it is going to self-destruct, and we're going to get into a colder, drier period. We're going to have civil wars, and we're probably going to have a major international revolution where the people take control, because right now the government thinks it has control, and it doesn't really. what is happening is the government is just as scared as everybody else is. And so they're reacting. And I didn't talk about that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get into this.
Peter,
this
can
in this
I say
part.
something? So basically, they've hidden this whole cycles information from us, and they use different things that's going on in the world to get what they want, and we end up losing more of our rights, our money, and our health.
That's basically correct. Yeah. And it all, what I always say is follow the money. It tends to revolve around money, where we had this, looking at feudalism in the sort of 1000 AD up until about 1500. That was our system, our economic system until then. And in 1694, we developed the Bank of England, and now we have got a situation where the Bank of England and all the central bankers have grown this monster, where they have had made contracts with all of really the G20 countries around the world, and these central bankers control all of these countries because they're now providing the money. That's the agreement. And so none of these countries can create their own money under that agreement until we break free from that. And
And
so
that's slavery. That's slavery right
that's
there.
slavery.
That
Yeah,
that's nothing but slavery. So
it's debt slavery.
we've
Yeah.
never had freedom since then, and that's the rule. And understand, I'm going to let you take it away, but people do not have to die of starvation. They don't have to die of dehydration. They don't have to die because of sanitation, and they don't have to die because of mutation either. And I think you know what, it's this had to happen. This needed to happen. Okay.
Well, it has to from a cycles perspective, and
Yeah.
and it really, it just flushes out all of the bad stuff every 1,000 years, and we start over again.
One big toilet.
That's exactly right. But one of the things that Wheeler hoped was he hoped that governments would learn about this and that they would be able to compensate for the bad times. I don't know that that's ever going to happen.
No,
to the
you'd have
degree
to have
that it has.
honesty. There's no honesty in government, so.
There's no honesty. The other thing that at the top of the cycles, because we are at a top of a 1,030-year cycle, also a 500-year cycle, is that the truth always comes out at these cycle tops. That's the magic of it. I
You
find
mean
it.
floats to the top?
It floats to the top and
Yeah.
just comes out. So I'm
Yeah.
sure we're going to find out who killed JFK. We're going to find out the inside job behind 9/11 and those towers coming down and all the other atrocities that have happened over the years. And it's going to be amazing to find that out. And I think there's going to be, at least we've been hearing, there's going to be a very big declassified data dump in the next couple of weeks, where we're going to learn about a lot of this, because there's a lot of pedophilia out there. And it is going to be in places that is going to just shock you when some of this stuff comes out in the next couple of weeks. So,
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
let's clean house.
Let's clean house.
clean
That's
house.
what this is all about. And so we're going to go through some pain until we get there. So we went through this this chart, and I'm going to pick up from this little area in here and sort of take it forward from the top of Queen Elizabeth I.
Sure.
So here was where we ended off, really, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I want to move forward from what I explained as the Maunder minimum. Now we are going to, you get the ups in climate. So these red lines, this is the temperature, and the green line is the rainfall. And rainfall roughly follows temperature, but you get these ups and downs where you get very dry weather and, very cold and wet, or you get very dry and cold. So this is a cold dry. In cold dry, of course, you get more democracy, and we start to get our rights back. In when it is getting to the tops here of temperature, you get authoritarianism, tyranny, you get propaganda, you lose your freedom of speech. This happened under Elizabeth I as well. It tends to be a woman's world. Bottoms tend to be a man's world. You will find that dresses are going to get longer to the downside, and they're very, very short to the upside. So we're going to have a much better life as we turn to the downside. And we're just on the cusp now of getting colder and drier. So this climate mania.
Peter, did you say we're going to have a much better life now?
No, going forward. But it's going to take a revolution and a civil war to get there.
All right. Got it. I got it.
Once that is done,
Yeah.
let's say over the next 30 years, after we've cleaned out all the deep state and all the corruption that is rife, we are going to move forward
So yeah,
and have
so
a much
so
better life.
there's a revolution coming. There's civil war coming, and that's not just in United States. That could be in every country in the world. That's what's going to happen, right? Or
That's
pretty well.
exactly what's going to happen. Most
Okay.
countries, and certainly countries where the central banks have been involved and in control of the money. So I think that what's we're going to have is the money coming back, and countries, these G7 and G20 countries, regaining their sovereignty, and we're going to have our own currencies again, because currencies are for the people. They belong to the people. And when you get into these corrupt governments, which we have all over the world, they've given away our money. They've given our money to these central bankers, and it needs to come back. But the problem is these central bankers kill people if they get in the way, and that has happened over the last 300 years, where we have, the president of the United States, JFK. One of the reasons that he got taken out was because he wanted to create a new currency within the U.S. and get away from the Federal Reserve, which is a private set of banks. They have nothing to do with the government, even though they are called the Federal Reserve. And that is going on all over the world. People don't realize that these central bankers got their hooks into us. And what the central bankers don't realize is that there's no way out for them. They think they can control the economy, but Mother Nature is going to teach them otherwise. And this has happened over and over and over again, because one of the things we're going to talk about in this session is what is happening with the stock market. Okay, so here is a list I gave at the end of the last
Part
section.
one. Yeah.
Part one, which told you that these are the traits you get as we turn from turn from warmer and wet. We're sort of warm, dry right now, and we're going to get very, very cold. And I think we're going to go into a little mini ice age over the next 500 years. Now, that's not going to kill us, but it is just going to be tough on food because we're going to have shorter growing seasons. We've had flooding. We've lost some of the farmland, certainly in the U.S., that we that we have had before. We have had problems with insects in Africa, for example. So, and China is having starvation problems right now, and they're also having energy problems. So all of these things, and it's interesting, often a little bit of a tangent here, but these central bankers and people have been trying to destroy the energy industry just at the point where we're going to need it. So all of this craziness about climate and greening the economy makes absolutely no sense, and is going to put us in a lot more trouble than we would have been in otherwise. But that's where manipulating the stock market and the economy always creates more problems than it solves. And that's the point that we're in. So governments and central bankers are really the ones that are to blame for what we're going to go through, because they've made everything much, much worse. So this was England in the 1600s, and I want to carry on from here. This is a 172-year cycle, and those are typical cycles, and the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune determines that cycle. And interesting things always happen, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, at these cycle tops and bottoms. Sometimes they can be very accurate. So moving forward, we left this. This is the bottom of the Maunder minimum, where it was very cold and dry, about 1720. And if we get to the next slide, you can see that all of a sudden, coming out of that coldness, we got all of a sudden quite warm going up here, until we had a spike where it was very warm and wet, an ideal climate for empires to grow. We didn't have large empires, but we did have some empires that grew up because this wasn't a very long period of time. It was only about, you can see here, about 20 years, 30 years, where we went into this warm and moist. But we had some of the rulers that were at the tops were called Frederick the Great, Louis le Grand, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Louis the Great. And I made this comment in section 1 that it's never the politician that is recognized for how good or bad they are in real life in terms of what they have done. It's really where they appear in a cycle. If it's warm and wet and we have good times and we have an expanding economy, people think they're great, they're wonderful, and they name them that way.
So I don't think we'll be getting Trump to great, will we?
Well, depending on what happens, the problem is with Trump, if he stays on for another year, which I believe is going to happen, I'm looking at within that period a stock market crash. So while he may be revered now, the second part of his reign may be very different in terms of how people see him, because
Right.
whether he clears out the deep state or not, we're going to be going into a very miserable time in terms of both cold and a stock market, which is going to come down. And I know that they don't know this, but that's Mother Nature playing out. Okay, so it's interesting. We also had, going into this, as I said, as it gets warmer and wetter, I call this springtime. And then we go into summer, and then we go into fall on a much grander scale. And then we get into wintertime. And winter, I said, can last a very long time, which it did during the 1700s. But here's the golden age, which started as it came out of this Maunder minimum. And in the going from about 1650 to 1750, we had a golden age of Voltaire and Newton and Locke and Racine and Benjamin Franklin, for example, Bach, Handel. So we get these golden ages in clumps, and it has nothing to do with the expertise of these musicians. It has to do with their psychological position at that particular time. As it gets to be spring, and in spring, you are ready to jump out of your pod pretty well. As it's getting warmer, you've had enough of winter, and
Yep.
your psychology changes, your thinking changes, and that's what happens in these larger scale periods. And so that's what you're seeing here. So we called this the Enlightenment, and it happened from about 1715, which was the end of the Maunder minimum, up until 1789 was actually the French Revolution. So over this period, even though it was cold and dry, and we had rising inflation and government debt and inequality, that went on for almost 60, 70 years here. And the American Revolution, all of these, when I talk about revolutions, they always happen, and civil wars always happen when it's cold and dry or cold and wet. All right, and that's what we're getting. So here's some of your revolutions that happened during this period. And it stayed cold and dry. Were you going to say something as I was?
No.
Okay.
You're doing
All
great.
right. So let's move on then. There's 1780, and we start to get into the end of the 1700s and into the 1800s. And so this continued to be dry and cold during this period. And then we had the French Revolution. So this just built the bad times. And we have these, you can see this with Louis XVI, how they're dressed. The kings in these days just spent money and put their countries into bankruptcy, and we had the 1% and the 99% again. And what happens? You get a French Revolution. We also had other revolutions, which people don't point to as much. But here's the countries that we had all of these revolutions all at the same time. So you can see that this is not an event in just one country that happens. It happens internationally,
Right.
depending on the climate and how we're affected by what these countries do.
And we're on our way there now, right?
And we're on our way there now. So this would be us at the top. This is warm and wet. And then we head back down again, and then we get so this is the 1800s. So here's 1800, and then all of a sudden, out of the French Revolution, we get Napoleon, who started up and created his own government, created his own financial system, which the bankers did not like, because we had going back to England way back here. 1694 was the start of the Bank of England, and it was created in part by the Rothschild family, all these central bankers. And so that really began our new financial system, and it was corrupt right off the bat. So we've ended up with this crazy financial system that you can't actually create money. You create money from nothing, but it's debt. So every time you create money, you're actually creating debt at the same time. So it creates this crazy system that you can't get out of. As long as everything expands, the economy expands, you're fine. But when it turns down the other way, you go into deflation and everything falls apart, and um, money starts to go back to its original form, which is nothing. So we have all this digital money, and when the stock market comes down, as it's going to, all of that money doesn't go anywhere, it just disappears off the face of the earth. So then you end up with less money, and that is a deflationary situation. And I'll go into more of that as we go forward here. So there was the 1800s, and then it got colder and drier. We had a year without summer. You always have terrible weather, in a period of about 4 years after the top here. So we've had a lot of flooding, if you remember the last few years in the US, for example, and even in Europe. And there's still some flooding going on. We're having big floods in China right now. And so that is obviously an issue. Another golden age happened at the same time as Napoleon was taking charge. We had all the greats in classical music, and they all happened over a period of about 50 years. It's fascinating to see that. So that was just in this period here, and it continued through part of the 1800s. And during that time, we also had Charles Dickens, 1812. So he was after the top. And Charles Dickens, of course, talked about all the problems in England, and it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And yes, it was. It was more the worst of times than anything. But again, you have this move towards democracy. And even though you have civil wars and all of these outbreaks and the depressions every 20 years in the 1800s, you still were in control of your life, and you had democracy, and you were free. And there was very little socialism, very little tyranny. You get tyranny at the tops of these highs, where you get more high temperatures. When it's wet and warm, it is actually good times. When it is warm and dry, when you have this green line down here, that's where you get the tyranny. And so we didn't have a lot of that during the 1800s, but you do see that we had the American Civil War right at the bottom here, 1861, for a period of, I'm not sure, 5 years or so. But during that period of cold and dry was the American Civil War. And then you had Queen Victoria in England, who gave this whole period some stability. So she was in place for almost 60 years, well, 64 years, I guess, looking at this. And so that is looking at the 1800s, and then we move ahead from there and we get more into today's world. You get the rise of imperialism, and the rise of imperialism is because it's getting warmer, and as I explained in the big chart, which is here, of course, as it's getting warmer, you're getting imperialistic international wars as we get whatever, and it's the American empire that's starting to build here. These international wars like Vietnam and some of the other ones, the Iraq War, that they went into, you get a lot of these on the way up, and World War I and World War II. So here's the rise, beginning of that. Depression of 1873 was a big one. Then we had a depression of 1893. These were all deflationary. We have never had a depression in the history of our economies anywhere in the world that has not been deflationary. So and this is what I'm going to go into when I get into the stock market, you need to understand money. And that's one of the things I teach on my site, is the understanding of what happens to your money. So during an inflationary stage, which we have had ever since England, really the Bank of England in 1694, inflation is how the government steals from you. And it's very similar to taking a silver coin and taking the silver out of the coin. It destroys the value of our money. So if you were to look back at an arbitrary point, which is the beginning of the Federal Reserve in 1913, when we had currency that was actually, a dollar was worth 100 cents and was tied to gold. That was kind of pure money at that particular time. And now, 100 years later, our money, our dollar, is now worth under 4 cents to what it was then. So you need to understand inflation, because why are our homes so pricey? Because they're asking us to pay for the same building that we would have bought in 1900 with money that's worth 4 cents. So they want more of it. So therefore, houses become um, I can't say worth more, they become priced much higher. But you're paying in currency that is worth an awful lot less. When we turn into deflation, everything turns upside down. So your money becomes worth much more, and houses go down in volume, or sorry, down in value, not down in value. I got to be careful with that word, because the value of the house is exactly the same, but the monetary price of it goes down because the money changes value. This is
Right.
a very hard concept for a lot of people to get, but it's something that is, I think, crucial to understanding how your money is going to change. So here were the end of the 1800s, cold and dry, and then it started to get warm. And you can see World War I happened over 4 years where it got very hot, all right? And then it went back down again. It's interesting. World War II, very hot, hot and dry down here. This was actually warm and wet, which was a little unusual, but we got into when it was really hot. Of course, in here we got into Nazi Germany. We had the Dust Bowls in the US, for example, and it was very warm. And you have the tyranny of Hitler, and you tend to Mussolini, the fascism, all of that stuff happened during this period, of course. And so that's really a kind of a precursor to what we have today. You get all of these dictatorships. And then it got cold in here, and then it got warm again. And we had the Vietnam War over this period, and some cool, wet periods in here, where things, because we had the aftermath of the war, the economy stayed, in pretty good shape during this period. But here's what we got as we started to get warmer. So you can see us getting this hot, dry all the way to today. Here's 2000. I haven't taken this all the way to today because I don't have the data. I haven't plugged in the data for the last 20 years, but the temperature has really gone sideways. We're at a top and we're heading down. Here was the 1970s recession. This was a very cold period for about 5 or 6 years. And we had Nixon. We had some of these other failing presidents like Jimmy Carter. There was another one in there, and I can't think of his name right now, that kept falling off plane stairs and things. I can't think of his name right at the moment. But anyway, these are the presidents that are sort of considered failing presidents, and not through anything that they necessarily did, but just at the time that they happened to be in power. Cold and dry is not very good if you're a politician. As it gets warmer, and it started to get warmer, so this was like a little spring where we had politicians that were that have much better reputations, until we get much higher to hot and dry. And really the last 4 presidents were corrupt, beginning with the Clintons up until, except for Donald Trump now. This is what we're talking about with the deep state. And you can see how this is the rainfall. It is hot and dry. That says tyranny. It says authoritarianism. That is where we are now. And Richard Nixon, at the cold, dry period, of course, in 1974, delinked the dollar from gold, and that has created fiat money, and that means people start to speculate in currencies, and it creates this situation where the 1% with the know-how become richer, and the 99% that are you and I, because our money is self-destructing and is now worth 4 cents, we become poorer. And that's where you get this 99% and the 1% thing that happens every 172 years, and has pretty well happened throughout history. And then everything resets. We have a complete crash, and we go back and start over again. So there you go. That's looking at sort of where we are today. And from that, and going back over, and you had some Russian and German revolutions. The revolutions always happen when it's cold. It's really, and here's Woodstock 1979, which I was at, and that was the top of actually it was the top of a solar maximum at that point, and it was also very warm and wet right before it turned cold, and that was the end of the Vietnam War. So it's interesting. And what you're seeing now, of course, is, as well as the corruption, Trump is trying to bring home the troops. So we're going to go from imperialistic wars all through this period here to civil wars. So everything is changing. Everything you knew through all of your life is going to turn upside down. And that's why you're feeling so out of sorts because we don't teach this in schools. And we should. I mean,
Well,
don't you agree? This is something that we need to teach. It's what our ancestors knew, not to this detail, but they paid a lot more attention to the sun and the planets and the moon than we do today.
yeah, but Peter, they don't even teach in school. You know what? I'll
Well,
tell you
that's
something right now. I've got grandchildren and I've got children that adult children that can't write very well, can't add very well, can't read very well. So I'm not sure what they teach, Peter.
so we're going back to better times that way because they'll
Yeah,
start. And I think we're going to go into homeschooling as the market crashes and we'll
that'll
get
be
back.
that'll be the
They,
best thing for us.
yeah,
Yeah.
and very little television. Actually, why look at television? What's going on now is a lot better. I hate to say that, but it really is. All right, so here's again just as a summary of the 4,000 year period that I'm showing here from 1943 minus, which is really about the year 2000 BC up to about 2000 AD. Now, these numbers at the bottom here are actually 172 year cycles. So you can see 2007 was the top of the most recent one, 1835. So I showed you 1492, we actually had the discovery of the New World. And at the same time, we had Italy falling apart really at that year. It was a turning point. And you can find that these turning points are really quite dramatic. So here's 1492, for example. We had Christopher Columbus, and at the same time, Bonfire of the Vanities, which was really the Italians, the people burning all of their books and burning their artwork. And it's really like propaganda on top of loss of freedom of speech. So it's interesting that these things tend to happen at the tops of these cycles, no matter where they are. You move ahead to 1664, which was the bottom of this cycle, but it was a cycle turn of 172 years. You had the bubonic plague a year later, and we had the fire of London the year after that. So that was a pretty dramatic time where London actually burned to the ground and they had to start over and rebuild pretty well from scratch. So that was a major event. You move ahead to the panic, 172 years, which was actually 1835. And the top of the market was closer to that. The major downturn was in 1837. And this was worldwide. And it was the largest depression to that point in the United States. So again, another where they had to start over again. So this is the visual from that period. And then we go to 2007, and that was the top of the 1,030 year cycle, where I expected we had a recession where the market came down quite a bit, and then it turned back up again. And the reason for that was I call it printing of $8 trillion, but it was in debt. They took that and they didn't actually print real money. So they didn't put money into the economy. They actually put it into the banking system, but it was all debt. So our debt has ramped up. We have more debt now than we have ever had in history. And that's where I want to sort of end that section talking about these larger cycles and now get into talking about the stock market, which has its own set of cycles and does not move the way most people think it moves. They think that events change the market, like they send it up and down, but that's not what happens. It's the opposite. The market, I often say that the stock market is a mathematical representation of the mood of the herd. So if it's going up, everybody is elated. They're very positive. If it is going down, everybody is depressed. And if it was based on events, the market would be all over the place. And I often laugh at these pundits that say the market went up because of such and such, and then the next day it goes down, and they have to rewrite it and say, well, it went down because of this. It's all complete garbage. So this is why a lot of people lose money in the market, because they don't understand that it moves based on cycles, and it moves in a very predictable manner. And so that's where I'm going to take you next. Any questions before I get into this?
No,
I
no,
think
it's
this is
good.
fascinating. Okay, so let's go look at another luminary from the 1930s. And this was Ralph Nelson Elliott, who discovered how the market moved, or how it does move. And so he was a businessman, an international businessman, and in his off hours, he decided to do all of this work. And actually got quite sick and towards the end of his life. And that's where he developed the Elliott wave principle. And this is his original book. And he talked about, based on the market, nature's laws, and developed a number of laws based on how the market moved. And so he died in about 1948. I was born in 1950. Some of these people I wish I had met, because I find them absolutely fascinating. I got involved in the market about 2000, in the early 2000s. And so I was really learning this. It's taken me about 6 years, I think, to really understand the Elliott wave principle. And now I basically call the market every day, and I am very seldom wrong on the market. Very seldom. And what I do is every day I put out a video on the US market. I do the US dollar. I do the major indices, the S&P 500, the Dow, those sorts of things. I do silver, gold, oil, and the major US dollar currencies, which is the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar. So all of those, I do a video every night and tell people where it is going to go. I have people that pay for that as a subscription service, so it keeps me very busy. But here was his original book. Now, a gentleman called Bob Prechter, who I've met, like Bob, but he doesn't really understand. He's a communicator. He does something called socionomics, which he is much better at, and that's very much akin to cycles. He really explains the ups and downs of how the mood of society, and it very much follows the cycles. So we're very much in line in terms of socionomics, but he's got a number of errors in this Elliott wave principle book that came out in the 1970s, and I have solved over the last 10 years all of those problems. So I'm writing a book, actually, which is going to be Advanced Elliott Wave. So I'm seldom wrong. So what I'm going to show you is something I believe very much in, and it is a science, and I'm very accurate. So believe me, this is where things are going. Most people will not spend the time to learn this principle, and will not. It's like anything else, and you can attest to this. Most people are pretty superficial, and we don't have good education anyway, which you said, and so they won't spend the time to really learn this, but I did, and it's taken me well over 20,000 hours of looking at the market over 10 years at least, and so I've become very, very good at this, and I'm going to take you through the basics of it. So what he talked about, or what he came up with, is that the market, a trend, always moves in 5 waves. And so very simply, here are your 5 waves. So if you've got a market going up, it will move in a first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, and fifth wave, and then it will change trend and move in 3 waves, and that we call a correction, and then it will do another 5 waves. So you can always tell the trend in a market if you can see patterns and see the waves. And one of the key things is the 4th wave in this 5-wave pattern cannot intersect with the 1st wave, or it becomes corrective. So that's sort of the key principle. There's an awful lot of other rules, and a lot of these patterns have patterns within them, like triangles and flats and ending diagonals and various patterns that repeat over and over and over again. It's the same set of patterns. And this is always you'll see this when I show you the real market, but this is the basic concept of how the market moves. Now, this is also fractal. So within these waves, you got a first wave, you will find in a trend, which is called a set of motive waves or impulsive waves, you will find that the subset has 5 waves. Here's the second wave, 3 waves, very much like this. 5 waves, 3 waves, 5 waves, 5 waves down in this A wave, 3 waves up, 5 waves down in this B wave, but this is corrective. So that's the simplicity of it, and it really is a pattern of, really, you have to be able to understand patterns. One of the things that I did when I was younger, in my teens, I went to university and I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and my father, who was English, wanted me to be a doctor or wanted me to be a lawyer. And I went to the University of Toronto, and it was Scarborough College, and in that in the curriculum, they played videos every week to you on a big screen. You hardly ever saw the professor, but the professor would show up the next week and tell you the mistakes that were in the video. I didn't that's not a way to learn. So I lasted about 6 months there, and I decided that I was going to leave. And my father, of course, was horror struck. And I ended up spending a year and a half, or about a year and a half, couldn't get into school, and I ended up going to Ryerson and took radio and television arts, which was a degree program, and that was more my style. And so that during that process, when I was 18, my father put me through a battery of tests. And one of those tests was manipulating three-dimensional objects in space. It's really seeing patterns, and I went right through the roof. They've never seen anybody get everything right. And that's one of the things that I did that, has made me very good at seeing these patterns. I can look at a chart and tell you if it's in a trend. I can point out the waves to you. And so this is not easy to do, but if you're good at understanding patterns and seeing patterns, you'll probably be very good at this. Now, it's not just in the market. You'll find this in society as well. So here is a cigarette. This is a chart of cigarette consumption over about 100 years, from 1900 to about 2000. And if you look at the rise of people smoking cigarettes, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves to the upside. And then you can see it coming down in an A, B, C wave, 3 waves. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the stock market being a mathematical representation of the mood. All trends run in 5 waves. So when in this COVID monstrosity that we have, they say that we're going to have a second wave, I said, what? We've already had 5 waves up. So here we go, new cases versus new recoveries. This is one of the things I did originally. 1, 2, now 5 waves within the third wave, which we had in the cigarette 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 waves, we're done. And it comes down in an A, B, C. It's the same pattern. So you can see this all through society. And in fact, this yellow line is the new cases, which of course are all, they're using these PCR tests, which give you 97% false positives. But anyway, you still get this Elliott wave pattern, and that's a trend. And then this is the counter trend. And if you were to look at this one here, you can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is also in 5 waves, and it's come right back down again. So when they said we're going to get a second wave, I said, well, you don't get second waves. Once you get 5 waves up in a pattern like this, it's over, folks. And that, in fact, is what's happening. So the COVID pandemic is virtually over. And if you know, this is another thing, if you understand the cycles and you understand the movement of the stock market and how this is all again relegated by, guess who? The planets, our solar system. In fact, there are a lot of people that will trade the market based on the full moon. They will do it based on, different conjunctions, and something that is within the market. And I'm just going to go back to, here's my market, my schematic on the market. There are Fibonacci, and if you don't know about the numbers of nature, you should do a little bit of history. They're really a little bit of research. They're really, really easy to understand, and I'm going to show you them. But all of these waves have a Fibonacci relationship with each other. So for example, if you were to say, measure this wave and call it 1 unit, you would find that the third wave is always either 1.62, like 162% times the length of that first wave, or it is 262% the length. The fourth wave always retraces 38%, which is the reciprocal of 62%. And then the fifth wave is always 1.618 times the length of the first wave. Okay, so those numbers are probably a lot for you to take in. I'm going to try and explain some of that when I talk about the universe. This is the solar system. The golden mean is what I was kind of alluding to, 62%. is what we call the golden mean. Now, every wave within the stock market has a relationship to 62%. And where does that come from? Well, if you were to take the ratio of the distance between all of the planets in our solar system, and here are the numbers, and you average those out, that's the average that you get, 1.618. And that is called the golden mean. And that is all through the market. So if anybody ever wanted to argue with me that we are not influenced by the solar system, I would have to point to this and go, this is in everything. Like, for example, it's in music. And let me take you through the Fibonacci sequence. How do you get to the Fibonacci sequence? Well, you start with the number 0. Then you put a 1 after it. Then you add these two numbers and you get 1. Then you add the last two numbers and you get 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3. 2 plus 3 equals 5. 3 plus 5 equals 8. These are the numbers of nature. Now, when you get above about 13 and you divide 13, you take 13 and you divide 21 into it, the number you get is this number, 618. And that's true for the entire sequence. And so those are the numbers of nature. They're in, for example, music. They often talk about, the music of the universe, but you can look at CEG, just a simple chord, which is three different keys. An octave is 8 notes. There are 5 notes in a not a triad, but most chords have got 5 notes, and so this is all through music. There really isn't anything else in it but 3, 5s, and 8s. And you find this all through the stock market. You'll find it other places as well. The human body has a relationship to 618. For example, these are the lengths of our feet. Our belly button ends up being, if this is usually 1 unit here and then 1 unit to the top. So our belly button is usually just about the midway between our top when we stretch out our arm and the bottom. And there are other relationships. It's in our DNA. This is our DNA, 618. The reciprocal is 0.382. You'll find it in plants, all through plant life, all through animal life. The Parthenon, any artist knows about the golden mean because the top of the Parthenon, the depth of it was 0.318 and the bottom of it was 0.618 to the entire length or entire height, which is a 1. It is a very pleasing relationship to look at, a ratio, all right? If you looked at playing cards, you would find that the width of the playing card is 0.318 and the height of it is 0.618. So, I mean, it's just all through society. And you will find that's also the way we populate. So I don't have that diagram here, but that's quite a science that's also in the relationship of, multiple generations, how many kids you have and that sort of thing, based on that 1.618 number. So this is nature. It is what I have been talking about. I think it probably has a timing aspect in larger cycles, but I haven't figured that out yet.
Peter, I mean, for the last 40 years since I've been in health, it comes up all the time. And people that study say, you know what? It's all about math and waves, math and waves.
All about math and waves. You're absolutely right. And light is in waves. Everything is or it's spinning globes.
Yes.
And those are, and you get that with, our getting into our a cell, and that from an atom. It's basically spinning objects, and that's what we have in our solar system. And so we're all energy, and this is just part of the same thing.
Right.
So now I'm going to get into the market and show you how this relates to the market by showing you, for example, the Dow. Now, if you're not familiar with the market, I'm going to make this relatively simple for you, I think. I hope so anyway. This is the largest bubble we have ever had. I'm looking at the Dow. Now, the Dow is 30 of the largest stocks in the U.S. Equities market. It falls under the New York Stock Exchange, and there are a number of sub-indices. The Dow has 30 stocks. The S&P 500 has, I think, around 6,000. And so different indices have a different number of stocks, but they all move in the same pattern together, just to different degrees. This is looking at from, let's say, 1929 to where we are today. So the Dow is sitting at around 30,000 points, where in 1929 it was about 560 at its height. And this is a linear scale. So this is what it is actually sort of doing based on a linear scale. I'm going to show you a log scale, which is what we usually show charts in, because a log scale will make the movement of, our $500 moves similar to the 30,000. So I'm going to come back to this, but just let me take you. So that's what it does. Here's 1929. And then you can see that we're up here to the 30,000 level again. All right. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just really stretching it out. But the point I want to make here is that 1974 was what we call a fourth wave. I told you about the 5 waves, and that would be the bottom of the fourth wave, 1974. It was a recession, and then it took off and it ended here. This is the top of 5 waves. This was 2007, and then we started to come down in that recession, or they call it the Great Recession, which is silly because it's really the beginning of the Depression. And then what the government did, and the central bankers, they injected this $8 trillion and then sent the market up. So you can see what they've done here. This is the damage they've done. If we had topped here, we would have been done with our depression and on the way up. But what they've done is they've created all of this imbalance in the market. This is all debt. There was as much here as there was from 1929 to 2007. We've had 5,200% inflation over 45 years. So when you talk about hyperinflation and people are expecting that to happen, that's what we've had over that period of time. And 1974 was the same period that Lincoln decided to delink the dollar, and it got everybody from the currency, from the US dollar, and it got all of these people speculating. But this was the top. It was the top of 5 waves. And then we came down in 3 waves. And then we have this kind of 5 waves up, but it's a corrective wave. And I'm going to show you how that works in a larger bubble here. This is the log scale. So here's 1929, where we had that big drop. Remember, it was very, very cold that year, which I find fascinating. And then it rebounded in about 1933, and it headed back up. And then we had what we call a second wave. So you can see, you can't really see the 5 waves up here, but you can certainly see the 3 waves here. All right, so that would be a corrective wave. And then if I was to measure this first wave, the top of this third wave is actually 2.618 times the length. So there's your Fibonacci levels. And so if you measure your waves in any of these patterns, you can usually get a good idea of where the top is going to be. So this was the top of the third wave. It happened to be in actually the top of the third is probably just in here. But the early 70s, and then we went down in 1974. This is the bottom of 1974, the fourth wave. And then we had a very large wave up, which was actually this is a Fibonacci multiple of this number. It is 2.5 times, I think. But that took us up to the top of this 5th wave. The market should have been over, should have been done. 2007, I was expecting what you see here. But what happened, of course, is they plugged the market with all this cash and they sent us up for one more wave. Now, it's interesting that Elliott, who developed this theory, said that we could have a B wave. This could happen. But in Prechter's book, he said, no, it can't happen. Well, we have one. And that is just against Mother Nature and what we are. I'm going to zoom into this to show you what we have here. But we are at a top, and it follows all the rules of nature. Now, what happens when you get a retrace, and this happens to the original 5 waves up, when you get a 3-wave correction, it always reverts back to the previous 4th wave. And we're going to go back to the previous 4th wave, which was at $570 in 3 waves. Now, what do you think that means? Well, you talk about cleaning everything out. That is going to, I mean, how many companies are going to be left public companies when you go from $30,000 at the top here? And I think it may not go to exactly, it goes to the area of, but we'll go to, I tell people it should go eventually under $1,000. Transportation is going to break down. You're going to have no major organizations are going to be left alive anymore. You will have problems with food. This is going to take, I think, about 5 years to do this. So we're going to have a very big drop. And then usually these things go up about 62%. This is the same pattern that happened after 1929.
So,
So it's
we have that first drop, and then we're going to come back,
and then we're going to go
drop
back up 62%,
okay.
roughly. In 1929, it only went up about 50 some odd percent, and then you have another great big wave to the downside.
When do you think we'll start doing the first drop? Or are we doing it now?
No, you're going to in 2021.
2021 it starts. Okay.
2021. I think it's about a year away.
Okay.
And it could go into 2022. It really determines out what happens in the next month and a half, 2 months, I think.
Right.
Because I'm expecting a 2,000 point drop in the I'm going to show you that 2,000 point drop in the S&P 500, and then one more high. All right, which seems pretty amazing, but that's what we're sitting at. We finished our 5 waves, and if I were to show you, I actually have a chart that takes you back to about 1700, and before about 1750, we're really talking about grain, because grain in the olden days was the stock market. And you'll find out that, and I took out this chart, I was going to show it, but I thought it would be a little bit long. You would find that at each of the cycle tops, which would be 1492 and 1664 and 1835 and 2007, between each of those you have high inflation, the prices go up, and when you hit that magical number, which is the 172-year top, it goes down in a deflationary phase, and then you start back up again to the next 172 years. So that is a video I'm going to do just on that in future. I haven't done that yet, but it's fascinating to see how these things play out.
Yes,
it's
definitely.
at work. It is nature at work, and most people don't know this. So let's go over to the S&P 500, and what I want to do is take a look at just this final wave up. Okay, so there was the top, and we had this drop, and I'm going to show you that in the new chart. So we're really going to go from here to here, and I'll show you what's happening in today's world. So here we are. This is the S&P 500. It moves similarly to the Dow, but it just has a different number scheme. So the top that we're at right now is about 4,000. We're going to get up to that. We're about 3,500 at the moment, and that will be our top. And I believe late night 2021 will be the top of this, and it could stretch into early 2022. You will find, if you do the probabilities, that the market usually comes down in either the fall or the spring. And January, February are big dates. So is May, and then October, September through November are the big times it usually tops. 1929, the top was in early September, and then it came down over the next 3 years. All right, so that's typically what happens. But here's 2007. This is the top of 5 waves, and then this came down in 3 waves. It kind of looks like 5 in here, but it's actually a first wave and then 5 waves. That gets a little technical. But here's the bottom of 2009, and then we started up again. But this is what we call a corrective wave. So it's a rogue wave. Anyway, we call it a B wave. It's not a natural wave, but it follows the natural gyrations of nature, because
Right.
The planets are still spinning. They're still influencing people. So it's just that when planets are in a positive phase, the market will go up, and it goes up in, like, I can measure this, and measuring from here, the extension to this point is 2.618, the length of this first wave. So it's fascinating when you get into this, how easily it follows what the planets are doing and what the universe is doing. It is Mother Nature at work. These are the laws of nature. So you can see my fractal numbering of these, the labeling. And what you have is waves within, so 5 waves. These are the yellow 5 within blue 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, blue 5, within white 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it will come down. So what we have right now is we're right here, and we're looking for a 2,000 point drop in this pattern, which is called a broadening top. And then we've got one more wave to the upside. And I think this is going to this is going to come down very fast. I would say we had this one, I called this in February of 2018, and they're blaming this on the coronavirus, but I already knew it was coming down, virus or not. So it had nothing to do with that. And in fact, all the virus stuff we've been talking about, this came down to March. All the virus stuff we've been talking about has been since March, and the market has gone up. So that doesn't make any sense to what they've been feeding you. They've been saying that, the market is doing what it's doing because of this virus. It had nothing to do with it. And the virus never does. Events have nothing to do with the market. If events had to do with the market, you wouldn't have the numbering system and the measurements. This thing would be all over the place.
Right.
Brexit would send it down, and it would go up for something else, and it would just be all over. But it doesn't. It moves in a very predictable manner. And so that is the stock market. Now, very few people know that. And that's the problem. They all get sucked into this, listening to the pundits and thinking if they trade this way. But the problem we have now is that we're at a top. You want to be, if you have investments, now would be a really good time to get out. Because when we have a fifth wave, a problem with a fifth wave up, we have one more wave up, not everybody participates in that. So you will have a lot of stocks that will be topping at the top here now. And I think this is going to come down when Trump is announced as the new president. We're so close right now that it looks like that's what's going to happen. And another point that I will tell you, that ever since about 2016, virtually every stock market in the world is moving in tandem, and we've never seen that happen before. So I would suggest to you that that has to do with the deleveraging of debt. So the US dollar is heading down right now. It's at the point of turning to the upside. Going down means that the dollar is becoming worth less, the US dollar. It's the reserve currency, so we always look at that. To the upside, when it turns, and it's going to turn when this market comes down, when it turns to the upside, that's deflationary, and it means there's going to be less money in the world. Well, less money because it's all going to get destroyed as this market comes down. But as it gets destroyed, anything that there's very little of becomes more valuable. You can take that to your favorite television set. If you had widescreen TVs, if there were only 5 of them out there, they'd be very expensive because everybody would want one.
Right.
It's sort of the same thing with currency,
right.
in that if there's not much of it around, it becomes more dear and it becomes more valuable. So you will see prices start to slide everywhere as we go into this deflationary environment. And that's what you need to understand. So the big lesson from this is, once we top, you want to be in cash. Cash is going to appreciate in value. So
when would that be? When do you want to
well,
be?
It will be when the dollar turns to the upside, which I think is going to be starting in January to a degree, but it's going to take it will take over 5 years to get to where it needs to. By the time it's at the bottom, you're going to see homes selling, $100,000 homes selling for 15 to 20,000.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is, okay, well, everybody's saying take cash and put it into gold and silver. That's a really smart place right now.
Well, no, it's not. Well, it is if you're going to use them as coins.
Oh.
If you're speculating, when the dollar goes up, gold is priced in the dollar, gold is going to go down. So gold is sitting at, what is it right now? It's about $2,000, $1,700. Right at the moment, it's going to go down to about $700 an ounce. As the dollar goes up, because it's priced in, if that ever changes, but it's priced in US dollars. So as the dollar goes up in value, you're going to be able to buy more gold for it. So the price of gold will go down. Now I can show you that on a chart, and technically it means, but that's what This is called, this is Elliott wave. This is technical analysis. This is how the market moves. I can show you that we have a corrective wave in gold going up, and we're getting very close to the top of a fifth wave. It's going to come down, and the dollar is going to go up. That's what the independent charts are telling me. That's what should happen. That's what's always happened in a depression.
So, okay, so when would a person actually buy the gold and silver? When we go into a depression?
Yes, at the bottom.
So at the very bottom you buy.
Yeah, that's where you want to buy it. And this is one of the things that this tells you is you never buy at the top. Like what happens with people is people get enthused. You're seeing all of this information about the stock market hitting the mainstream media. And that's when people tend to buy. They buy at the top. That's crazy. What you want to buy, when we get to the bottom of this, everybody will say, don't go into the stock market. It's terrible. It's going to kill you. That's when to buy. Because you want to do everything the opposite of what the herd thinks. And that's one of the basic rules for being in the stock market.
When do you think when do you think we could be looking at actually going into an actual depression economically?
Well, it will start when we reach. Well, we're already sort of in it. You can feel that, but when we get the actual numbers, when houses are already starting to come down in price, so we're into a slightly deflationary period. Central banks have been trying to inflate now for the last 10 years, 10, 15 years. They haven't been able to do it. They keep plugging money into the economy, and now they're talking about these $2,000 checks, and everybody says we're going into hyperinflation. Well, the problem with that theory is that now our money's worth 4 cents, and when you inflate it even more, it'll be worth 3 to 2 cents a dollar. So it's like, I often say, it's like a pool of water. If you start to put in some blue dye, you'll see changes as you're putting in the drops. But once you have a whole bunch of blue dye in there, putting in more blue dye doesn't do anything.
So you think gold is going to drop to $700?
Yeah, gold is going to drop to around $700 eventually.
Eventually.
That's when I would buy it. Yeah, over the next 7 years or so as the dollar goes up. Now there's a bit of a caveat to that, because if all of a sudden they change the currency or do something to it, I still think that's or they change what it's priced in, that would change, because right now it's priced in the US dollar because the US dollar is reserve currency. So it's going to move opposite to the US dollar, which is going to go up. So it's going to go down.
So you think the U.S. dollar is actually going to go up over the next year?
Yes, absolutely. But the herd will tell you it's going to go down. And I'm a contrarian, and a contrarian always works. Technically, it's going to go, the U.S. dollar is going up, because all of this money is going to get destroyed. And when it gets destroyed, that's deflationary. And that means there's less money around. And the other thing is that so many countries are trying to get away from the US dollar. So the US dollar is all over the world. And if countries start trading in something other than the US dollar, which they are trying to do more and more and more, you look at Russia, which is banding with other people, like they call them the BRICS, creating their own financial system and their own base currency. If that changes, then the dollar gets used less and less. So there's less of it out there. So it will become more valuable. It is a mind cruncher getting your head around this, but that is the way things work. And the herd doesn't understand that. And in fact, most economists don't understand deflation.
Well, I just purchased a lot of gold and silver. So,
well, I would melt it down into coins, and and you'll be good for but I would not be speculating in gold or silver at the moment because it's near a top. It's always going to be valuable. Yeah. But it's going to down, and what are you going to lose on? You will always have it. It is a safe haven because it never goes to zero. It will never go to zero.
Right.
So it is a good thing to have, certainly some of, because you are probably going to need it based on what happens with currencies. Because, no government's going to be able to cure this thing on their own. What has happened throughout history is that everything crashes and then they start up from nothing. Right. And I think that's when we're really going to have a new currency, and everything is going to have to drop in this great big reset. But people don't understand that this is where things are going. We've got so much debt, it is all going to crash. And even if they said, let's get rid of the debt, it's still going to crash the market there really isn't any way around that I can see. I've been playing with various scenarios, and I'm doing a write-up on this right now of what some of the alternatives could be. But as long as the US dollar is the reserve currency, and that isn't going to change overnight, then gold is going to react to the price of it, and it will go up in value.
So
The
you
US
just
dollar will
said
go up.
make my silver into coins. Well, how do you do that? I mean, you didn't mean that, did you?
You can get a treasury to melt them down for you. I don't think it makes, and create them into coins, because that's what you want. You want to use gold and silver as a medium of exchange
Right.
when currencies are breaking down, because people trust that it is
Right.
real money.
Right.
But the dollars we've got, the paper currency we've got isn't worth anything except what the government says it is, or what we believe it is. And when we lose confidence, and banks lose confidence because they're not lending. And that's one of the problems too. The way you get money into the economy is that banks create loans. And so if you understand the banking system, which is a crazy system, when people demand loans, more money goes into the economy, and that creates inflation. When businesses are cratering like they are now, when people are losing their homes and mortgages are falling apart, that creates the opposite effect, where money is getting destroyed and going out of the economy, and banks are not creating money. In fact, they're bringing it back in. Then that becomes deflationary. And I took out a slide just before we started, which shows the deflationary spiral. So that's what's going to happen. That is what has happened every time we've had a depression.
So you think the U.S. dollar is going to climb back up, and it's going to stay there for a few years, or?
Yeah, probably for a few years, until the market probably drops, or until people stop using it, or we get a new currency, which again took 10 years to get into the European Union.
Okay, Peter, this is all just so crazy, because that's all I hear now is buy gold, buy silver, get out of cash, do this, do that.
And just look at the URL of the people that are usually saying that. So if it's somebody that has the URL goldenmoney.com,
Yeah.
there's a reason they're selling you gold. And a lot of these people also believe that gold is a safe haven. Well, it is a safe haven, but you have to understand how it's priced and what it's priced in and where the dollar is going. And a lot of them are talking about inflation. These people don't understand money. It's incredible. They don't understand that we have a 4-cent dollar compared to where it was. So it's not worth anything, and that everything has to revert back to where it was 100 years ago. Or
Hey, you know what?
years ago.
All I know is that finances are upside down and backwards, just like healthcare. Everybody thinks that medical care is healthcare. Everybody thinks that the food they eat is healthy. I mean, the whole game is rigged. That's all I want to say.
It is, and that should tell you that's the end of the line, because we have so much debt, and people think that a lot of people think everything is okay. I mean, I was hearing in the last couple of years that the Dow is going to go up to 60,000, and I was going, you guys are crazy. It's nuts. We shouldn't even be where we are, because this is a rogue wave. It's a corrective wave.
Right.
It's just, this is crazy. And if I was to read you, Robert Prechter wrote a description of all of the waves. If I was to read you the description of the B wave, you would go, yep, that's exactly the economy we're in. Because it's I don't have it handy that I could read it to you, but it is a kind of a punk wave. Like what it says in terms of going up isn't really how you feel, because people should feel very optimistic, but they don't.
Right.
It's a B wave. That's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be leading you to a C wave, which comes down like, I don't know, a rocket shot the wrong way, an anvil.
But that's still a few years away, maybe 5 years, 7 years.
No, the start of it is, the start of it, going back to my previous slide here.
Yeah.
If we're 2021, I'm saying about 2026 is the bottom.
Oh, I see. Right.
So we'll have a first wave that'll come down probably around 8 months, and then this will climb very slowly over about a year and a half, and then we'll have this stair-stepping last wave down that will go for like 3 years. That's what happened in 1929.
And that's when transportation falls apart. That's when you better make sure you have a good food source and everything else, right?
That's right. Live in the country. You are going to be responsible for your own health and and we won't have a medical system. So it really gets back to natural substances that you treat for your health. So I mean, that's to a certain extent a good thing, because all of what I'm reading about, mushrooms and how they cure cancer, and how the pharmaceuticals industry, I mean, we've got so much crap that they put on crops and everything we eat. Of course, it's caused all of our problems. And so we'll be getting back to a natural life,
Well, if
is
it,
all I can say. And it's very positive, I
it
think.
might save the sixth extinction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm seeing going forward. And I'll tell you, Elliott Wave and the way the market moves does not lie. I mean, I'm just right all the time on this thing because I can read the waves, and I read news, but I make sure that I keep myself totally objective in everything I do in terms of the market. And
Math and waves. Math and
I read,
waves.
yeah, math and waves, and it tells me where the market is going to go.
And that's the same thing. Math and waves is everything on this planet. There's nothing that you can't look at that doesn't have something to do with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So this leads us into kind of the overall view of the monetary system. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you're in the US, you know about the Federal Reserve. People think that that's part of the Treasury. Well, it's not. It's a set of 12 banks that are privately owned by the central bankers of Europe. And that's the Bank of International Settlements. And so they are controlling the money in the US. And of course, their fear is that everything is going to crash because they make their money from the interest. And if everything crashes, there is no interest coming in. And therefore, they're going to lose their great big building, which is sitting in Switzerland. It's a lovely, great monstrosity. And they have set up a situation where they've kind of coordinated. It's like the Vatican. It's an area around them where nobody can get in and regulate them at all. They have their own rules, and it's just extraordinary how they've been able to take control. But once that comes down, then we lose our central bankers. Once the market comes down, we're going to lose them one way or the other. Trump is talking about this, putting in a new currency and also getting rid of debt. Well, that's going to screw them up totally. So it's kind of one way or the other. It is becoming the end of central bankers, and they know there's a problem. And this is the reason they want to try and get in one single currency, a digital currency around the world that they control.
That'll never happen. That'll never happen.
It'll never happen. And so that's why it's really, really important to get away from this crazy digital currency, because digital currency does nothing for you or I. What we want is money that's like your gold and silver. You can feel and see. And banks are going to, it's really kind of the demise of the banking system, because banks don't have your money. They have it all invested. And once the market comes down, it's all gone. So what I tell people is you want to have a nice safe or a very large mattress, and you want to have your money where you can see it. And that is a nice, safe way. That's a nice banking system, because banks are near the end of their life. And so we're going to see that in the next few years as well. But I think that's after we top. I think that's after the market tops. I would say sort of 2023 sort of thing, that we're going to see an awful lot of banks that are going to go bankrupt. Now, I'm lucky where I live in Alberta, because we have a public bank. It's the only one in Canada. It is backed by taxpayers. There's one in the US called the Bank of North Dakota. It did very well in the Great Recession in 2008, and so did the Alberta Treasury branches. But that's about the only. There are some safe banks, but most other banks, most private banks are over leveraged, and they don't keep your money. Their banking system is all about taking in money and then putting it out in mortgages. And once mortgages go bad, and putting it into the stock market and giving it to governments and investing in all kinds of things. And everything is going to come down. So there's nowhere for them to go.
So the bank in Alberta, it's called what?
The Alberta Treasury branches. Alberta Treasury. It's owned by the government. Yeah, that's where I have the bulk of my money. Not that there's a lot there. I plan on making it as this market comes down.
Right.
Because, on that wave that I said I called in February, well, I ended up in hospital that weekend with the largest kidney stone I've ever passed. That's one of those, side trip from Crohn's. Anyway, so that I missed that whole wave down, unfortunately. And it was only in there for a few days, but it really screwed me up at the top. It only took a month to come down very fast. So there's the Bank of International Settlements, those are the bad guys. And they have contracts with all of the G7 countries. And this was the last number I had in terms of the debt of all of these countries, $38 trillion in US dollars. But those are our G7. The only one that is on the outside of that is Japan, which sort of have their own system. But all of these other countries have signed these documents with the
Right.
central banks. They give them their money, and in return, they get access to the SWIFT system, which allows them to trade with other countries, like that. But that, and so that starts to shut down trade as well, which is going in that direction anyway. So you can see that this is all kind of coming together. All right, so that's looking at the financial system, which is going to collapse, and we will have to come up with our own financial system, like we did at the collapse of feudalism. We came up with the Bank of England and started this new system, which is manipulated. All right, so your money. So let's just do a quick thing. I just want to tell you about things that you should do to stay safe financially. And there's a lot more on this on my site. And I will, promote that at the end here. But here is looking at 1913 was when the Federal Reserve was created in the US. You could put the Canadian dollar here as well. It has the same pattern on the way down. So here's 2016. And what this is showing is the effect of inflation. So in the 1913 to about 1920, we had a lot of inflation. And then we didn't have the crash right away, but in here was the crash. And we started deflation early, just like we've started deflation early now. And we're going to have a lot more of it. So this was deflation. So the value of the dollar goes down in inflation, and this is what you're seeing. So it went down from about being worth $1 to being worth about 60 cents, 55 cents in this area. Then it went back up to about 80 cents in the 1930s. This is the 1930s. And then it started inflating again with the war coming on. And where's 1974? You don't see, right about here is about 1974 when they delinked gold from the dollar, and it really took off again to the downside. It took off here as well, but it now means that it's taken out 96% of the value by 2016. So you do the math, that's a 4-cent dollar compared to what it was in 1913. And that's why we can't keep the same standard of living, because everybody's dealing with money that's virtually worthless. Everything costs more. And that's because of inflation. And when it turns around and goes to the upside, and we may get up here to 50 cents, all of a sudden your money is going to buy all kinds of things, like $20,000 houses that 6 years earlier was worth $100,000, or your $1 million home for $150,000. Those are the things that people are going to buy. So you want to be in cash. You do not want to be in investments, and you want to have your cash, as far as I'm concerned, where you can see it. Now, you don't have to do that immediately, but when banks start saying, without being asked, oh, everything is okay, then that's when I'd be worried, because that's typically what happens. When it starts to hit the mainstream media about banks saying that, it's the same thing about the stock market. You can tell the tops of the market when it starts to hit the mainstream media. That's always been the case. Or at the bottom when it hits the mainstream media, because it tells you it's about ready to turn. People don't know that, but when it hits, it's at an extreme. And when it goes, so that's when the market always tops and bottoms is at an extreme.
Right.
So knowing about your value of money, so here's your homes are going to go down 80% or more over the next 7 to 8 years. And they're going to hit rock bottom. So you'll be able to buy the house of your dreams. A lot of them you're going to be able to get from banks. But again, if they do a debt jubilee, that may not be the case. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm not sure, but they are going to go way, way down in value as your money increases in value. Just common sense. So you should not be buying a home right now. If you wanted to short the housing market, if you're not playing the stock market, some people have sold their homes at the top and are waiting to buy back something of a lot more value at the bottom. That's shorting the housing market, and they're going to rent in the interim. So if you did the math on that over about 5 years, you win big time on that, because if you have a home for 1 million and you sell it for that and you buy it back or something similar for $150,000, you're not going to be spending $850,000 over a 5-year period in rent. So, you win. And that's the situation of what is going to happen with homes. It's going to help. It's going to hit other purchases as well. So you want to hold off on other major purchases. Cars, I think, are an interesting one, which depreciate anyway as soon as you buy them off the lot. But the other thing that is happening with inflation over the last 30 to 40 years, that everything is getting cheaper, because to keep the prices down, you can think of electronics. They put computers in everything. I've got a computer at the top of my dishwasher. Well, that's smart. You got at the hottest part, they've got a computer, and that's great until they start breaking. And so the first jobs that always come back at the bottom are blue collar jobs, because everybody needs everything fixed again. But what they've had to do is use products that are cheaper. They've had to find cheaper ways of making things, and that also lowers the shelf life of all of our products. So they keep breaking all the time. And that's just a function of being at the top of an inflated market. And so what we're going to do is, once everything crashes, we're going to get back to much better made products, and we'll take a lot of what we're seeing out of the economy. So cars, if I was getting a car now, I'd be getting a secondhand car devoid of computers. I keep them to a minimum, something that you can go to, because we're going to get away from these major car companies and plugging into a computer database to figure out what's wrong with your car and fixing it. You're going to be going to what we used to have 50 years ago, your neighborhood mechanic, and he needs to be able to fix your car. So things are going to get dumbed down a lot. We're going to lose companies, or most of Apple and a lot of these major corporations, that some of them, like IBM, is already showing problems, may not be around. So where are you going to get your computers fixed? So that's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out, because people don't think about this as like, we're not going to have an awful lot around. I'd be getting yourself a lot of puzzles and some board games, and start thinking about not getting educated for a white collar job, because they just aren't going to be around at the bottom of this drop in the stock market. Get rid of debt, because the problem with, when your cash goes up in volume or in value, so does your debt. So it gets a lot more difficult to pay off your debt, and you're paying it in dollars that are worth more than when you actually got it. So that may be a hard concept. I spent a lot of time on this on my website, and I have a separate little video. Actually, it's on my YouTube account that you can see for free, but I'm spending a lot of time helping people understand how money is going to change. It's going to change to your benefit. For the last 100 years, it's been to the benefit of the government, but now it's going to turn to your benefit. You just want to be able to keep the money that you've got. So I would be, if you have lots of buildings, I would be selling buildings. I would be getting into cash, and just waiting for this thing to bottom over the next few years, because you're not going to get much more out of any investments that you've got. We are more or less at a top. Another year isn't going to change anything. So the message, cash is king going forward. I can't say that strongly enough. Cash is king. And, I do these presentations, and people always come up at the audience at the end, but where should I invest? No, I know I have to do this over and over and over again. Cash is king. Their investments are dead. Do not invest at anything anymore. You want to be in cash. And hey, what if I'm wrong? Well, you have your cash. You're out of the market. You can always get back in, but I'm not wrong. And this is what has happened over and over and over again in history. And we're at this top, and we are going back to a cash society, and we probably will be using silver and gold at some point. It will be getting back to basics. Now, a fly in the ointment is that should say credit jubilee. I spelled that wrong. There's my only. And there is a thing again called Nasara Gesera, and you can go, and I don't know if you talk about this.
I have not a lot though.
Okay, so you can go and search this out online. The problem that I have with promoting this and there's a great story behind it, and the story has to do with, they were Bush was actually going to do it with his credit jubilee the day before 9/11. It's a great story. And then apparently the senior Bush moved into the White House, and the senior Bush was involved in the 9/11 thing. It seems a little wild. And so the whole problem with Nasera Gesera is a lot of this stuff, the documents based on it, because apparently 207 countries have signed it. They're all under lock and key. So I can't get any really good data on it to say this is real. And I always like to have as with my climate, I always like to have two sources for the same story. And I don't have that. I know there has to be a debt jubilee because we can't possibly get rid of all this debt. It's unsustainable. So that is going to happen one way or the other. And so I just kind of throw that out there for you. I just lost my sound. There we go.
Peter, can I ask you a question?
Sure, you can.
So okay, so you're saying that if you have gold, if you have silver, make sure it's coins,
Yes.
not bricks. And
Right.
would you sell it and just make it cash now, or would you
That's not up to you. I'm not a registered broker, so
No.
so it's
Personally,
really,
what would you do?
it depends on your financial situation. Like if I had lots of money and I had $100,000 in gold, I mean, I'd make sure it was coins, and I'd probably just keep it if I was worth $10 million, because
Right.
it's nothing to me,
Right.
So, but if I put everything into it, I would probably want to get down out to a lesser amount, because right now we're very close to a top in gold, so I'd get a good buck for it.
Right.
But it is going to go up to about, I just can't remember my chart, and I don't have anything handy that I can look at. It's going to go up to about $1,800 before it comes down. That's the top of the fifth wave, roughly, very close to $2,000. So that would be good, but it is going to go down. So you will be able to do well by selling your gold. Everybody else thinks it's going up, but it's whenever the herd thinks gold is going up, it'll always go down.
Right.
The herd is always wrong at cycle tops.
Okay.
There's a great gentleman wrote a book on, he's an Australian who I've talked to, wrote a book on real estate, and I'm just not seeing it in front of me, but it's The Great Real Estate Secret or something like that. Yeah, here it is here. Excuse me, but oh no, that's not it. That's one of Proctor's books. But it is a book on real estate, and he goes through all the real estate cycles, and it's all about the 18-and-a-half-year pattern in the markets. And he has a great line that just never underestimate the stupidity of the herd at cycle tops and bottoms, because they
Right.
are always wrong.
Right.
And so that's, as soon as it, again, hits the mainstream media, everybody's talking about gold going through the roof and hyperinflation. And once that hits the media, I can tell you it isn't going to happen, because that's what the herd believes. Okay, staying safe. Where you live is important. I think I live in one of the safest places. In fact, Wheeler said this as well. He said on the eastern side of the mountains, it's a good place in the center of America. We don't get earthquakes here. You live in a great place as well. You don't want to be living in cities. I went down to New York, where I spent a lot of time with Wheeler's work, and I looked around and I said, this place is falling apart. There's really, if the water stops coming in bottles, and food is hard to get at, where do you go in New York? You can't get close to food. There's going to be major problems, and they're going to have riots and civil wars. And when people get hungry, they will do anything. So in the U.S., it's a bigger problem than it is in Canada, because the proliferation of guns is, huge. So there's a lot of potential downsides. So where you live is very important. You want to be close to food. And I always say you want to be close to natural water.
Right.
I can walk.
Absolutely.
I can walk to water from where I am if I had to.
Me too.
Food and water, farming, gardening. You need to get into gardening, because you're probably going to want to create your own garden. And so I'm not yet, but I'm going to spend some time on that aspect as well, and tell people how they can do that. And I may not do it myself, but I'll have other people that are very good in that area. Money, gold, silver, cash, so safe by public banks. Public banks are great. Only one in Canada, one in the U.S. They will last. I am sure of that. But gold and silver, they're going to go down in value. Cash is king.
I apologize, but can you tell our audience the name of those two banks again?
Oh yeah, sure. Bank of North Dakota is in the U.S. That's their bank, and there is a move for other states in the U.S. to create public banks. I don't know how. I don't think it's gone very far, but some of them are in the process.
Right.
And in Canada, it's the Alberta Treasury branches
Okay.
and other banks. You know, other private banks are can be good. You just really have to check out how they're investing their money, and if they keep most of their money in in the bank where you can get it. It's just that banks don't do that. They make their money from investing. Government services are going bye-bye. I talked to you about Ontario.
Yeah.
We're going to lose a lot of government services, so get ready to have bags of garbage sitting around outside your house.
Right.
Energy is very possibly a problem, and I would say, you can, for $1,000, you can get a generator that you can plug in if your power goes down. I think the internet may have problems at some point, so. And I think I have a landline. See, my phone is a landline. I don't actually have a cell phone right now, only because I lost it in New York and I haven't replaced it because I'm too busy. And I think that a landline is a really good thing to have, because if the internet goes down, you're going to have problems with cell phone service. And I think a landline is the way to go. Cell phones are good for moving around, but convenience. I always tell people, you can go to a Mac store or some other convenience store. Convenience is always more expensive. So, it's they sell it as a big bonus for you, but financially it is always costs you more money. So just keep that in mind. Community skills, you probably talk about this, are going to be really important, and your community around you is going to be very important, because as things come down, you're not going to be able to go to the store and get some of the things that you used to have. So I've got a whole list of things that you should start to stock up on. And one of my favorite books, is the Prepper's. Oh, you're not going to see this. It's called The Prepper's Blueprint, first edition. There's other editions out. And it gives you all the things that you could, lists of the things that you could stock up on. And if you subscribe to my site, you're going to get that anyway. And I'm going to be providing lots of information in that area. Personal safety and emergency prep. If, guns going forward are going to be a good thing for safety. I'm not of that ilk. And so I'm starting to think about that. But I would say that that's not out of something you should think about. Okay, we've given away a lot of our guns in Canada, which is not a good idea. I think that you need to have something to make sure that you can stay safe in the worst of times. And here are my two websites. And so what I do, Thriving in the New Economy, is what I call it the Thrive Academy. And I tell people about how to protect their health, wealth, and happiness going forward. What's really going on in the world. I've covered a lot of that. And it's amazing some of the things you can find on the internet. There are some people that are very connected to the U.S. military and also to MI6 in England and to the CIA, past people, and they're getting a lot of information as to what's happening in the U.S. And so I provide a lot of that and tell people what's really going on in terms of what I see happening going forward. What governments aren't telling you, the truth about money in banks. These are some of the things I cover. How cycles of history to predict the future, and how to prepare for the challenges to come, and key things you can do now. So that gets into the area of health and wealth, and certainly anything to do with economics. And I explain money. That is my key site for doing that, is thetruthsage.com. And that is where you can sign up for about $150 a year. I provide a newsletter on the site each month, and a fairly good sized video of about 20 to 40 minutes, which explains what's going on and where some of the things, where you can get a lot of the information. Most of it is within my site. I have a number of tabs on the right hand side where you can get information on health. You can get it on the coronavirus. You can get it on PCR tests. You can get it on all of these things that people want to know about, but I keep it relevant to what's going on in the world today. And my worldcyclesinstitute.com, you will find an awful lot of free articles on that about money, about not as much health, but certainly about the market. And that's where I have my service for calling the market. So if you want to speculate in the market, you could go there. There's a free 2-week sign on that you can do to get an idea of what I do in the market. So that's the presentation for part 2, and this is probably longer than we thought it would be, but there you go.
Longer and stronger. How's that?
Longer and stronger.
Longer
So
and
the-
stronger.
yeah. Yeah. So again, this subject is really deep, and the other problem is that people are not used to this kind of knowledge, and governments, and they've kept this from you. So it's brand new. Deflation. People don't learn about deflation. They should. They should be learning about cycles. I talked to somebody, one of these companies that these reverse mortgages, and when I was talking to him, I say, well, why do you do this? You give people 55% of the money, the value of the equity in their home, and they say, well, because homes always go up in value. Oh, okay. I said, thank you very much. So I would highly recommend that anybody, if you're over 55, you can do these reverse mortgages. They give you a whole bunch of money. And then when the market goes down, one of the things that certainly is in my contract is that I'm never liable for more than the market value of my home.
Beauty.
And I know it's going to be worth 15% of what it is now eventually.
Thank you, Peter.
So there you go. It's a little aside. So.
All right. So, Peter, I want to thank you for part 2, but understand something, everybody. We'll be back here on Wednesday, January the 5th, okay, where we're going to be taking all your questions. So I hope you've been putting your questions down underneath. And don't be afraid to challenge Peter, because he knows his stuff. And understand something. I get it. Your beliefs are going to be different than his beliefs, and everybody's got different beliefs. So let's have a kick at the can and put your questions in, and you can also put them in live. Also on YouTube, Facebook, or Intercom, and we'll take all your questions that you have. Right, Peter?
Well, yeah, depending on the time frame. If it's going into a couple of days of time, then maybe not, but an hour or two is fine with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you, Peter.
You're very welcome. I want this information to get out. People need to know where we're going, and they need to be prepared, because this is not your fault. And I think people need to be. If you are unemployed or your business is failing, this is not your fault. And you need to get out of this depressed feeling or fear and start turning things around and saying, okay, I know who the enemy is. It's central banks and the government. We will win, because we always do. There is always a revolution. The people always take back the power. It has happened throughout history. It will happen again.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. So basically what he was saying is welcome to Planet Earth, a fun-filled game if you know the rules. And hopefully that you've learned some rules here today with Peter. And you're going to learn more when you come with your questions on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay, it's going to be a live show. All right, and I just want to wish everybody and hope everybody had a really beautiful new year. And let's make this the best year of our life, okay? And I just want to go over a couple things before we shut down. Just so you know, that Unleash the Power was unleashed Friday, January the 1st at 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m., that is. 5:30 p.m. every day, okay, from January the 1st, okay, we have Unleashed the Power, okay, and it's on every day, okay, for 18 days. So Tuesday, January the 5th, 3 p.m., just know that Doc Talk Live, if you've got questions on health, emotionally, nutritionally, detox, 3 p.m., January the 5th on Tuesday. Usually it's Monday. We bumped it to Tuesday. Okay? And just know this, that if you want to learn how to create the perfect day for yourself, go to my website, click on consultations, and pay one fee, okay, for a lifetime support. All right? We will build you a strategy from the minute you get up until you go to bed. And then we will be here live online with you whenever you have questions. You call us. Okay? We've got an 800 number. We're here to support you. Okay? March 26th to the 28th will be will be our whole life mind and body masterclass. It's 3 days. And if you want to learn, okay, how to take your power back on an emotional and physical level, nutritional, and really learn how to do it, I'll teach you the 4 pillars. Okay, so check itioh.com for information on that. I will be lecturing in Colombia and Ecuador in April. And if you know anybody down there, you might want to check out my website at itioh.com. Information will be there. And our next certification course will be May the 1st to the 21st. May the 1st to the 21st. It's a 3-week course, 8 days of whole life coach certification where you get certified as a nutritional consultant, emotional consultant under the guise of the World Organization of Natural Medicine. And then we take a day off, and then we have 11 days where you get certified as a Wolfe Non-Surgical therapist. All right? Check it out again, like I said, at itioh.com. Don't forget, everyone, like I said, usually every Monday I have a Q&A, but this coming week will be Tuesday. And when you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe below. And make sure that you click on the bell to enable notifications so you never miss a show. And understand something. Share our shows. Share the information. Let's get it out there. All our shows and our Q&As are time-stamped. So you'll see 24 hours later. If you go to YouTube, you'll be able to find where you asked your question in my Q&As or where Peter talked about a certain subject. Also, if you would like to listen to our shows in audio version, please go to iTunes, Spotify, or SoundCloud. Again, I want to thank Peter, and I want to thank everybody that makes this show possible. All right, God bless everyone. And don't forget, don't just take your power back. This time, why don't we just keep it? All right? 3, 2, 1. You got this, Braveheart. And don't forget, if you want the information I can't put on Facebook and YouTube, please go to my Telegram, download the app, and I put information up there every day that you can go and you can start making your own decisions on what's going on out there. Again, God bless. Take care. And we'll see you on the Q&A. If you're looking for life-saving and life-changing information, well, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to click and subscribe. Stay connected.